Hallo Leute, ich bin Katja und ihr seht Deutsch für euch. We're getting started on the tenses today. In German we call these Zeiten, which literally means times, or also, to avoid confusion with the actual time, tempus, which is the Latin term for it. As I've already done in the past, today will be an introductory episode to the general topic, and then we will do an individual video for each tense. One thing you need to know right off the bat, the tenses in German are 1,000,000 times less strict than they are in English. This is because English relies very heavily on its tenses to convey exactly the meaning and intention that the speaker wants to get across. This is one of the consequences of your lack of changing words, so declensions, conjugations, and also your very strict order of words. So, you have to have something that gives you a clear idea of what is going on. To contrast this, in German we use declensions, word order, and nuance adverbs to convey these things. Meaning that in turn we get to be a lot more flexible when it comes to our tenses. We also don't have nearly as many as you do in English because we do not have the concept of aspects. You know what that means, guys? You completely have to let go of the idea of progressiveness. What? Yep, unbelievable, right? We just don't need that nuance. We're completely fine without it. That's why you get so many German native speakers in English say stuff like this. I eat right now. So this stuff is really down to the essence. A language's tense system is a huge part of its identity and how its speakers perceive time. Meaning that to use German tenses correctly, you will basically need to learn how to think like a German. At least partially. Some deep shit, huh? So in the beginning it might seem really awkward or hindering to you to not be able to express if an action is currently in progress, other than through using tense adverbs if that information is really essential to what you're saying. Because you'd be surprised how often it really isn't. But once you're able to get fully rid of that awkward feeling, you have taken a big step in learning to get the right intuition for the German language. So just so we're clear on this, after these videos, I do not want to read any sentences in the comments that go something like this. Ich bin essen mein Steak. No speaking in the progressive. So in general, this leads to German having about half of the tenses that English does, which in turn leads to them being used a bit differently. So let's take a look at an overview of the tenses first. The present, or Gegenwart. The tense we use here is called Präsens in German. Like in English, this tense is used to talk about things that are currently going on or happen on a regular basis. This is the only tense that you've encountered so far in my lessons, except maybe for some select examples that slipped past me. We can also use the present tense to talk about the future. The past, or Vergangenheit. For this time level, there are two tenses in German. The past tense, Prateritum, and the Perfekt. The more difficult one of these two is the Perfekt, because from its name it would lead you to believe that it is somehow related to your present perfect, which it really isn't that often, because your present perfect is one annoying mofo. And even beneath the past, we have the Vorvergangenheit, the so-called pre-past. In this time stage, we have the tense of the Plusquamperfekt, which pretty much exactly corresponds with your past perfect. And then lastly, we have our future tenses, or Zukunft. Like English, German does not have new endings for verbs for the future, like Romantic languages do, but we rather use certain words in certain combinations from the present tense to express future meaning. We can either use the Präsens for this, like I mentioned earlier, or one of the two of our future tenses, Futur 1 and Futur 2. So in total, German has 6 tenses and no aspects. That means no differentiation between progressive or simple forms, just to point that out again. And even though their usage is a lot less strict than in English, they all have their restrictions, of course. Another thing I would like to mention at this point is that talking about tenses also brings up the second and third way in which verbs can be irregular in German. So far, I've only talked about the present tense irregularities in our irregular verbs of the week. There are plenty of irregular verbs that have an irregularity in the Prateritum or the Perfekt, or most of the time both. These two regularities are the two that English verbs have as well. Sing, sang, sung. You have your present tense standard thing, and then you have an irregular past tense and an irregular, participle. So that's kind of what these two tenses are as well. The difference is that in German we get the additional possible irregularity in the present tense that I've been talking about so far. So I will get to those new ways of how a verb can be irregular once we've talked about the corresponding tenses. But for now, that's it. To get your own copy of the script for this episode, support me on Patreon and toss me a note with an email address that you use for DropBox. In our next grammar session, we'll be taking a closer but relatively short look at the Präsens because you should be fairly familiar with it by now, at least from a usage point of view. Until then, because today didn't really contain that much new stuff to study up on, make sure that for the next few grammar sessions you are clear on how to conjugate sein and also on how regular and irregular verbs work. Your random word of the week is der Fleck. Bis nächste Woche. Tschüss!